But first we're going to start talking a little bit about our read-alouds, and we're going to look at one of the first bullet points in read-alouds. And when we're doing that, one thing that we have to think about is that read-alouds are something that we kind of look at as an extra. We look at it as if we have snack, let's quick grab a book, that's going to be a read-aloud. Or we look at it as we have a separate read-aloud time, but that's kind of the time to where I talk, the kids are quiet. It's the quiet time in our classroom. But really, according to the quote, there's been so much research that shows that actually reading aloud with children is known to be the single most important activity for building knowledge and skills they will eventually require for learning to read. This is their opportunity to see a model of what they're supposed to be doing, and we know kids instinctively, from even the littlest ones who learn how to walk and talk, they learn all of these things through modeling and through hearing and seeing, and that's what happens during the read aloud process. And if we look at what research is showing that we're noticing in classrooms around, this is Michigan, in Michigan, on average for read-alouds with literature, there's about 8.36 minutes per day of a read-aloud. And if you look then now at informational text, there's only 1.36 minutes per day. So really overall, we aren't reading aloud to our kids as much as we probably should, but also we're not looking at different genres or different types of literature to be bringing into our classroom as well. So as we start thinking about read-alouds, I think one of the things that sticks out the most to people when they start learning about the bullet points is this first bullet point. And this is talking about text sets. And I'm going to let you just kind of read this to yourself a minute, so I don't have to read that loud. A couple things to point out from this is, first of all, the idea of a text set. A lot of times we pick out those favorites that we love to read, or the books that the kids are loving to read, without stopping to really think about the why and how we connect this to other books that we're reading. So the first part about this that's important is looking at sets of text when we're reading. The other thing to think about is this last line, that when we're picking out these books, these are supposed to be things that kids can't read on their own. We're trying to bring them to comprehension levels that are above theirs, text and vocabulary that are above theirs. This is their opportunity to listen and to model to text that they can't handle by themselves. And you think about those young kids who are in a lot of those decodable books, it's really hard to have a storyline in a decodable book. And so they really need to have these opportunities regularly to understand characters and a storyline. So why would we pull together text sets? Let me first talk a little bit about an example of a text set. We had done county-wide learning labs, and one of our learning labs was in a 4th grade classroom over in Forest Hills. And when we were in the classroom, she was doing a read aloud, and it was a big, thick chapter book. And we were all kind of wondering, is she going to bring in text sets or not into this situation? And she pulled it out, and she pulled it out in the middle of her teaching. And we asked her to explain a little bit more as to what she did with this text set. And she was explaining that what she did is she would go through the chapter book and she would look for the main concepts that kids might be interested or might not know very much about. So in the story, one of the characters had a disease. And so she said, oh, some kids might want to do a little bit more learning about this. So she put some of that in a box. And then as she went through, she found out some of the hobbies that some of the characters had, whether it was dancing, whether it was a magician, whatever those hobbies were, and said, okay, I bet the kids are going to connect a little bit more with the characters. So let's put in a box some of these things that these characters like to do. The kids might make a connection that way. Or she would look and say, we've been really studying this theme, and so now I know that kids are going to be really excited about this, so let me pull a different books that have kind of a similar theme or idea in them, and she put that all in a box. And so every time that she would read aloud with the kids and have conversations with the kids, she could easily refer back to and say, oh, this character loves this. If you're really excited about this, we have some books in our text set that you guys could look at during your reading time. And so she would constantly use that text set as a way to be able to refer back and forth to it. There was a time to where she had stopped and there was an informational text in there. And there was a point where the kids were asking questions about something. She set down her read aloud book. She opened up the informational book to that little spot. She read it to them, showed them the picture of them, and then she went right back to reading her chapter book again. And so a text set sometimes feels like this odd way of like, how do I read all these different texts all the time? It really isn't there for that total purpose of making sure you're reading all those books. It's there to show kids that there's a guide to be able to learn more from different books. There's a way to pull in different information to make connections to other stories, and that's how she used a text set. Now, when you're looking at some of the younger levels, you will see a lot of times thematic units put into place. And so there's a lot of times if you are studying animals, you have a lot of those animal books there for that theme time. And so what we're saying is start to think bigger than that. So let's say that one of the books is about an endangered species. Put something about endangered species, or put something about habitats rather than just putting just animals out. Because when kids are reading animal books, you're not really sure what they're going to chime into. They may be more excited learning that, oh, there's endangered species out there. I didn't know that. And so they might actually jump onto that idea and want to read a book that connects with that and just not pick another animal that's there. So really, when you're looking at books and text sets, think through the lens of a child and what might they connect with, and think through the lens of a reader and where might I need some more information. And those are the kind of books you want to start to gather and have at your fingertips when you're reading aloud. So some of the reasons why we do this is it's natural. Rather than saying every day, the word of our day is habitat. What is a habitat? The word of our day is habitat. And we practice that every day in our routine. If you just read different books throughout the week on habitat, the kids naturally say habitat often, and they naturally talk about what habitat is often without us having to directly say to them over and over again and memorize what the word habitat means. Also, naturally, where you see a lot of vocabulary are similar concepts. So again, kids are building background knowledge on concepts because they are all about similar things. It will help them then to retain and gain more vocabulary knowledge. It will give them the chance to have that background knowledge. I think there's a lot of times we talk about bringing stories to students and then being concerned, well, they've never had that background. They're not going to understand what this is, and we're waiting. Is there a video? Is there a field trip? Is there something we can do to help them connect? In all honesty, if we have a bunch of books about that topic and we read about it several times, you've just built that background knowledge. They don't need to go see or have parents bring them or do anything. You can build that right in your own classroom by having all of these related texts. And then, of course, the last one, whenever kids want to learn more information, they tend to go for informational text. They have a natural desire to know about that real world. And with that desire, you will naturally start to bring more informational text into your units when you make text sets. So this is an example of what like the kindergarten level might be of a text set. And I think one thing that's important is sometimes we get stuck in our mind that a text set is all informational or it's all fiction. And really, we just want you to remember that this is lots of genres. If you have poetry that fits in, put poetry in there. If you have a magazine article that fits in, put magazine articles in there. Sometimes you get things from like National Geographic or other places that have like the cards that have the animals and the talks about it on the back. Put that in there. So whatever text you feel like kids are going to gain knowledge from, put it in with that text set. And so I want you to just stop and think a minute about text sets, whether it's something that you do all the time, whether this is kind of a new concept for you. And I want you to just kind of think, what is the most important point that you're kind of taking away right now? Something that you want to remember or bring back to your staff about a text set. And I want you to just think about it and then just turn to the neighbor next to you and just let them know what that main point is or what that big idea is that you came away with from text sets.
So bullet number 2 under Essential 2 of Read Alouds says that read alouds involve modeling of appropriate fluency, which includes accuracy, automaticity, and prosody in reading. So just to very quickly kind of go through what those are. So accuracy is obviously reading accurately. And we all know when we read aloud, sometimes we make mistakes, right? Sometimes they're mistakes that we feel like we can just keep going. It doesn't impact anything. But then you always have that kid in the class who's following along who has to correct you, right? And sometimes we make mistakes that we do need to go back and correct. But that's just as important because we are modeling that as fluent readers, we still make mistakes. We still have to pause and think, wait, that didn't make sense, and we go back and fix it, right? So modeling those mistakes, accuracy doesn't mean we're always reading with 100% accuracy, but it means that we're also modeling what to do when we misread something. Automaticity is just that, quickly recognizing words, right? Automatically recognizing words. We don't have to stop and decode them. Pace is obviously just the pace at which you're reading. So we also know that if you're reading aloud, we have to read at a little slower pace, right, than when we're just reading in our own head, so that people can hear and follow along. And then prosody includes the timing the phrasing, the intonation, all of those pieces that put personality into our read aloud, right? And make it fluid and beautiful to listen to. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So read alouds, this is now bullet number 3. Read alouds involve child-friendly explanations of words within the text and revisiting of those words after reading using tools such as movement, props, video, photo, examples, and non-examples, and engaging children in saying the words aloud, using the words at other points in the day and over time. So that's a mouthful, right? So really what this is focusing on then brings us to Essential Practice 7, which is vocabulary. So this is where our read aloud essential and our vocabulary essential really dovetail. So throughout the rest of the session, we'll kind of be talking about both essentials, okay? So Essential Practice number 7 says intentional and ambitious efforts to build vocabulary and content knowledge. So before we really go any further, we really want to emphasize to you the importance of the reading and vocabulary relationship. They're an interdependent relationship. So reading comprehension is dependent on having the vocabulary to understand what you're reading. And vocabulary comprehension, vocabulary knowledge comes from a lot of reading, right? It comes from other places as well, but the more we read, the more we expand our vocabulary. So those two are really quite interdependent. What's important for us to remember is that explicitly teaching vocabulary and not just hoping that kids pick it up because we've read it in a read aloud or we've said it once and said this is what that word means. We have to explicitly teach it because we have many, many students in our classrooms across all of our districts who are coming to us from homes that are not rich in language. And when they come to us from those homes that are not rich in language, they're already behind. And we have to be constantly working to build that vocabulary for all our students, but particularly for those students. Okay? So, focused vocabulary instruction includes explicit vocabulary teaching before, during, and after reading. So we will be looking at a video a little bit later today where you'll see a teacher doing that. It means that before you do that read aloud, you have identified an instructional goal. Even if you're reading fiction, you're picking out maybe 2 to 3 vocabulary words a day. You certainly don't want to pick out 20 words and say, we're going to learn all these words today. There may be 20 new words in the read aloud you're doing, but you want to have that focused instruction on a few important words so you're not overwhelming the kids. You want to use child-friendly definitions, and you want to make sure that the kids can see the words. So either you're putting the book up on a projector or you're writing the words on a chart or on a board so the kids can see it. And you can, if they're younger kids, you can read by pointing, as you slide through the letters with them. And you want to make sure they say the word. So using tools in the explanation in that big long bullet that I read that said that's quite a mouthful, it said things like movement and photos and examples and non-examples, right? Any way that you can help those kids internalize what those words mean and remember them. So there's all your list. Semantic Maps is another one we'll take a look at. And then again, that planned instruction. So you've identified 2 or 3 words that you know you want the kids to get from today's read aloud. How are you going to teach them those 2 or 3 words? Planning in advance so that you really are intentional in your vocabulary teaching. And then finally, brief and focused. So you want the focus to be your read aloud, right? But you also want to teach the vocabulary. You don't want to take too much time away from your read aloud in teaching your vocabulary. Gotta turn my page. So this is from the Essential 7. So this is a bullet from Essential 7. I'm turning my page so I can tell you which bullet it is. Of course, I don't have it written down. But it says the teacher selects Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary words to teach from read-alouds of literature and informational texts and from content area curricula. So it's often very natural for us to pull vocabulary from our content area, right? It's part of the standards we teach, and but we don't always think to do it in our read alouds. So this is a video of Tanya Wright from MSU. She is one of the researchers who did a lot of work behind the essentials, particularly Essential 2 and Essential 7. And she in this video is talking about the difference between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do you know which ones to choose. Okay?
Teachers often feel really concerned about which vocabulary words to teach. So which are the right words that I should spend time on with my class. And my most important message, before I talk a little bit more about selecting words, is to teach the words that kids don't already know. And if you're doing that, you're helping them. So a big message is don't freak out too much about which words to teach, right? An unknown word that a kid now knows, you've helped them along. So it can be a little strategic because there's a limited amount of instructional time to really think about which words to spend focused attention on in the classroom. So the Essentials document, in alignment with the Michigan Standard, focuses on word tiers as one helpful way for teachers to think about which words might be useful for explicit vocabulary instruction. So Tier 1 words are words from everyday speech that kids likely already know, like jacket or clock. And those are probably not the best words to spend a lot of instructional time on because kids tend to pick them up from everyday oral language. Tier 2 words are also sometimes called general academic words. And these are often a new word for a known concept, like extraordinary for special or peculiar for strange. And these words are often found across content areas and across contexts. So kids might encounter them in all sorts of different texts. And Tier 3 words are discipline-specific words, so words that are particular to science or social studies, and they're often a new word for a new concept. So think about photosynthesis. Kids typically don't know the word photosynthesis, but they also don't understand the concept of photosynthesis. So the Essentials document is recommending that explicit instruction focuses on Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. But just a few cautions about getting too focused on these word tiers. One challenge is that many words fall into a range of tiers if we think about the definitions that I just provided. So for example, let's think about the word egg. Egg might be a Tier 1 word if we think about the food that's in your refrigerator. Most kids know that word because they see eggs around in food. But now let's think about the idea of the phrase to egg someone on. Now we're using the word egg to have a different meaning. We're not talking about that food in your refrigerator, so this might be a Tier 2 word that might come up across contexts. If we think about eggs in terms of reproduction and biology, egg is now a discipline-specific word, and then it might be a Tier 3 word. Or let's consider mammal. Mammal's a pretty everyday word for most adults. But for a kindergartner, this might be a really sophisticated word. So it might be a Tier 2 word that comes up across a lot of contexts, but they don't know what it means. And it also has a very technical science meaning, so it could be considered a Tier 3 word. Or the word front, which most kids think of as meaning in the front of the line, which is usually where they want to be when they line up. But front also has a very specialized meaning in weather, so it might also be a Tier 3 word. So overall, it's really important to remember that a word doesn't have a defined tier, and there's no right or wrong answer to whether or not to teach it. This is just one way to think through whether a word deserves substantial instructional attention in the classroom. Other ways to think about selecting words beyond word tiers include whether or not this word is important for content area learning. So does it align with the content area standards that you might be covering, or your curriculum perhaps for science and social studies? If it's an important word in the curriculum, it's an important word to teach to kids. We might also teach words that are important for instruction. So for example, we might teach the words for the narrative elements in literature, like setting, characters, goal, problem, plot, and resolution, because these are really important words that kids need to talk about texts. We might think about teaching words that occur frequently in grade level texts, and there are websites that have lists of these words for teachers. And another thing to think about is teaching words in meaningful clusters. So for example, we might work with kids to think of a whole bunch of different words that they could use rather than funny. And that could be particularly helpful for them in their writing when they're looking for a more interesting word choice than just the word funny, for example. So there's a lot of ways to think about teaching words. Another thing to consider is the type of text that is being read. So the tricky words in informational text and literature can be a little different. And it's important to consider this when choosing which words to focus on for vocabulary instruction. So in informational texts, tricky vocabulary words tend to be new words and new concepts, like the example of photosynthesis that I gave before. One good thing for vocabulary instruction is that informational texts tend to repeat that new tricky word relatively often. So a book on plants might mention photosynthesis more than once. This is great for a kid who really understands what photosynthesis means, but it's really could be problematic for the comprehension of a child who doesn't know that word. So it's really important to figure out what these big words are for new concepts that kids need to learn and make sure that we help them through it so that they can understand the text. The other thing to remember is the idea that words can have a specialized meaning in a particular content area. So let's go back to the idea of front in weather. It has a different meaning to its everyday meaning, and we need to help kids to notice that. Otherwise, it can be pretty confusing to read a book about weather and think that every time they're mentioning front, they mean the front of the line in the classroom. Words in literature tend to be sophisticated words for known concepts. So let's think about hysterical rather than funny. So kids already know the idea of funny, but what we need to help them understand is this is a new or more nuanced word for that idea. Typically in literature, these new words are repeated only once or twice. So that means that if we don't help kids to notice them, they might be okay to comprehend the whole text. But it might trip them up again and again when they see it the next time. So we might want to call these words out and help kids to learn these more sophisticated words. The other thing to remember is that these words are likely to come up in a future text. So even though we don't get that repetition within one text, we get repetition over time. So we want to help kids because the next time they encounter that word, if they know what it means, they'll have better comprehension of that next text. Last thing to remember when you're searching for words that you might teach explicitly in your classroom is that sometimes, especially in informational texts, the important new words are hidden in the graphics. So you might find that the text itself, on the page, says something very simple, but hidden inside the graphics, like the diagrams, graphs, maps, photographs, and timelines, are special words that kids need to know. So always make sure, especially when reading an informational text, not to read past those graphics, but to look inside them, to notice labels, captions, glossary words, keywords that are in bold, and sidebars, and check to see if there are important vocabulary words there that kids might need to know. So overall, what's really important is that we're teaching new words to kids across content areas and across texts that we read during the school day, that we're having opportunities for explicit instruction where the teacher is carefully selecting words, making sure to help children understand their meaning, and giving kids lots of opportunity to practice encountering and using the new words. It's less important which words we teach. There are lots of ways to choose words, but what's most important to think about is, will this really help kids either to learn the curriculum in the text they're reading now or in a future text that they want to read?
Okay, so focusing just on that part of the video that talked about the difference between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words, when I give you the signal, I'd like you to find someone wearing the same color shirt as you, and one of you explain what Tier 2 words are, and one of you explain what Tier 3 words are. Okay? And then also talk about when would you teach each one? When would it be important to teach those Tier 2 words? When would it be important to teach two? Okay, so hopefully your discussion time helped you to clarify a little more the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. But then also remember that she said that tiers are not the only way to select words, and in particular because words can cross all three tiers, right? So we really need to think about the context of the word. So just to kind of summarize some of the other strategies she said you can use to choose vocabulary, Obviously, words that are important in your content area. General academic words, so the example up here on the second bullet pertains to narrative text, like character, setting, plot, solution, right? Those words we consider kind of more general academic words that we use frequently throughout the year. Words that occur frequently in grade level texts. And there is a link here to textproject.org, and they do have word lists, I believe they're by grade level, on that website. And then words in meaningful clusters. So they might be meaningful clusters around a concept, but they also might be meaningful clusters in terms of like finding better words to use in writing, right? So looking at all the different ways that said is used in a text that you're reading aloud, right? Instead of always saying said. And what are the different nuanced meanings of those words? And then also thinking about those unusual words that often show up in narrative literature. Exotic, extraordinary, monotonous, words like that that kids won't see often, but are important words for them to learn.
So we're going to take a look at another bullet point in the vocabulary section. And this one, I want to point out just a couple things in this one. First of all, the child-friendly explanation piece is really important to remember that as you are going through and doing your read aloud, there's no way you can pull out every word that you are going to meet. Sometimes it is okay just to say, and this is the word and this is what it means, and move on. And keep it as simple as possible, something they know and can relate to, and just help them to keep moving along. Sometimes when we stop too many times, then the kids start to focus on trying to remember what you said about that word, and they've totally lost that comprehension. And especially if you're trying to model for our readers that are struggling, then we have taken them out of that, out of the way of being able to learn what comprehension is and practice comprehension through read aloud. So that piece of use a quick child-friendly explanation is important, but then also make sure that they're able to pronounce the word that you want them to do. So if it's a word you're focusing on, let them say it and pronounce it, and also make sure that they have a way to be able to see spelling. This is a way for them to be able to quickly make a connection to the phonics that they're having in class 2, and they're able to see a quick model of how you're using that phonics skill to help you in your reading as well. And so we're going to take a look at a video, and this is another one of the videos on essentials.org. And one of the reasons why I like this video is because she gives some different ways of being able to practice vocabulary. So you can see some different actions she's taken. You can see some different ways that she has tried to plan ahead of time for coming into the lesson. And so as you're watching this today, kind of think of it twofold. Kind of jot down on a list, what are some of the teacher moves? Like, what are some of the things that she had to do in the planning process to prep for this time together? And then also think about what are some of the student actions that she had them take so then they could practice the vocabulary terms that she's pulling out of this read aloud.
I really liked this book because there were many challenging words that I thought my students might not understand. So I went ahead and chose several words and gave child-friendly explanations, and I put that on the back. So as I'm reading the book, I have the page number already noted and the definition already ready. We do read-alouds every day, and so a vocabulary-focused read-aloud is an excellent way to introduce words to students that they'll find in literature and nonfiction texts that they may not otherwise hear. Today we're going to read Sylvester and the Magic Pebble by William Steig, and we're going to talk about some special words today as we go along, and then we're going to do some activities. Sylvester Duncan lived with his mother and father at Acorn Road in Oatsdale. One of his hobbies was collecting pebbles of unusual shape and color. On a rainy Saturday during vacation, he found a quite extraordinary one. Extraordinary means special or very unusual. It was flaming red, shiny, and perfectly round like a marble. As he was studying this remarkable pebble, remarkable is another way to say unusual or very special, he began to shiver, probably from excitement, and the rain felt cold on his back. "I wish it would stop raining," he said. To his great surprise, the rain stopped. It didn't stop gradually, as rain usually does. It ceased, which means stopped. The drops vanished on the way down. The clouds disappeared. Everything was dry, and the sun was shining as if the rain had never existed. I choose words that I feel will challenge my students and they may not understand in regular comprehension. I use child-friendly definitions, not dictionary definitions, that are quick and precise and focused for my children. I wish I were a rat, he said, and he became a rat. The lion came bounding over, sniffed the rack 100 times, walked around and around it, and went away confused, perplexed, puzzled, and bewildered. All of those words means he did not understand. I give child-friendly explanations throughout the book because there are many words that the students might not understand and that can interfere with their comprehension of the text. So I feel that if I can give them a quick definition and then move on, I'm giving them that window to understand the text. All the dogs in Oatsdale went searching for him. They sniffed behind every rock and tree and blade of grass, into every nook, nook is a little corner, and gully, gully means a ditch in the ground, of the neighborhood and beyond, but found not a scent of him. They sniffed the rack on Strawberry Hill, but it smelled like a rack. It didn't smell like Sylvester. After I read the book, I like to focus on 3 to 6 words that I want to work with the children on afterward and give explicit instruction on. I really liked how in this book there were a lot of synonyms. So for instance, remarkable and extraordinary were in the book, and they both meant very special. So we spent a lot of time with that with the picture sort. I like to have the students repeat the word often. We also look at the word and the different parts of the word so they can understand the meaning. All right. Another word we had was remarkable. As he was studying this remarkable pebble, it's another way to say that it's extra special or very unusual. Can you say remarkable? Remarkable. Remark means to comment on something. You notice something. So for something to be remarkable, that means it's so special or unusual that it's worth talking about or commenting about. So we're going to put these words up here. Can you say remarkable again for me? All right, so let's take a look. I have some pictures here. Abby, you said ordinary just meant?
Like plain.
Like plain. Okay, so we're going to put that here. Not very special, right? But if it's, what word is this? Or that is really special or unusual. So I have some pictures, and you're going to help me decide whether they are ordinary or extraordinary and remarkable. Okay? So let's take a look. I have a bowl of rice here. Anything special about it, or would you say it's ordinary? Which one? Who would like to raise their hand and answer for me?
Because a bowl of rice isn't exciting. It's just like food that you're about to eat.
So you would call it which one of these?
Here.
Would you like to come up and put it under ordinary for us? Okay. All right, now I have another bowl of rice. You ready to see this one? Look at this bowl of rice. What can you tell me about this one?
Extraordinary.
And why do you think it's extraordinary?
Because it's not like just a bowl of rice. It's actually like making a living creature.
So they almost made like art out of it. You would call that which one?
Remarkable.
Remarkable. Can you put this under remarkable for us? The more activities that I give them to do afterward as far as sorting or actions physically, it gives a lasting impact for them to remember those words. Listen to this paragraph again. And I want you to think about the lion and why the author used these words. The lion came bounding over, sniffed the rack 100 times, walked around and around it, and went away confused, perplexed, puzzled, and bewildered. I saw that little donkey as clear as day. Maybe I'm going crazy, he muttered. So we're looking at these 4 words. You say bewildered? Bewildered. Perplexed? Puzzled? And confused. So they all are synonyms again, and they mean the same thing. Can someone tell me what you think those words mean? Lexi?
They mean like you really don't know what's going on.
You do not understand, right? You do not know what's going on. It's an excellent book for vocabulary because there are words that have synonyms but with the same meaning, and we can teach one definition and have multiple words that mean that, and that gives students multiple ways to express themselves using a variety of words. There are a lot of opportunities in this book with sophisticated vocabulary words that I know that my students have not had exposure to. So I want you to imagine that you are really, really hungry, okay? Show me, I want to, without any sounds, can you show me what it would look like to be really, really hungry? Oh, I'm seeing some unhappy faces. Some of you almost look like you're in pain. Now all of a sudden you see a table full of fruit, delicious fruit. Show me what that looks like. All right, I see some wide eyes. And you're gonna go reach for the watermelon. Poof, it turned into a rock. Let me see the look on your face. You're about to eat it. What do you notice now? I see some eyebrows raising. Oh my goodness, some of you look really perplexed. You look very confused right now, Lexi. What are you so confused about?
Because it's not usually ordinary to have, when you're holding it, it just turns into a rock.
Okay, so can you imagine how that lion felt? Can you imagine that? So, listen, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do first, okay? In a minute, I'm going to have you stand up, and I'm going to name a feeling. And remember we've been talking in reading class a lot about the gestures we make with our bodies, our facial expressions, and our voice, right? So you get to be the actors and actresses right now. I'm going to name a feeling, and I want you to show me what that looks like and sounds like using all of those things, okay? So stand up. Okay, show me what happy looks like and sounds like. All right, what about confused? Now I see some more eyebrows. You don't know what's happening. You're not understanding what's happening. Okay, how about sad? Let's go over our words one more time that we learned, and how many of you think you might notice this in your reading? Or how many of you might try to use these words in your writing? I'm thinking about all the poetry we've been writing. What do you think? We've been talking about precise words. How many of you think you might use some of these words in your poetry? Okay, so we have extraordinary, remarkable, bewildered, perplexed, puzzled, and confused. There's a definite growth that I noticed using Read Out Louds for vocabulary instruction. I hope that they'll use those words in their everyday talk, in their classroom, use it in their writing, and then when they come across those words again in other texts, they will understand the meaning of the text. Learn more at literacyessentials.org.
I'm going to have you take a minute with your table group and just kind of talk about some things that you notice. Some of the actions, some of the wonderings. To note about the video, just to clarify, that not all read-alouds have to be vocabulary focused. So to do this every day would be overwhelming for the kids. It would be several different words, too many things in one spot. So just consider that this could be a lesson during your week, but it doesn't have to be. Comprehension can be a focus. Looking at your phonics or your word study can be a focus. So there are a lot of focuses you can have. This is just one example of one. Also, it's important to remember that even if you're reading a picture book, you don't have to read the whole thing in one day. If you want to focus on one part of the picture book and then pick it up the next day, that's okay. And for her example, she went through all this vocabulary the first time through, so maybe they need to read it again. And now the kids will have a whole different idea of what the comprehension is, or a better understanding of the vocabulary since they've gone through and done this lesson ahead of time. So reading a book again for another focus is a great way to practice reinforcing the skills that we have done with this Read Aloud.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about explicit vocabulary instruction, where the teacher is purposefully selecting words to teach and using different strategies to teach them. But kids can also learn a lot of vocabulary in our classroom implicitly. So implicit vocabulary learning happens when children just pick up new words from the conversations that take place in our classroom, from the teaching that we're doing. They just naturally pick up those words. So what I would like you to do is just take a minute and turn and talk to a partner about what might be some ways in our classrooms that children could implicitly learn words without our explicitly teaching them. Okay, if you can wrap up your conversations, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'll share with you some ways that kids can implicitly learn vocabulary in our classroom, and hopefully there'll be some of the ideas that you talked about at your table. So an obvious one is encouraging talk and discussion among our students. And that goes with that whole effort that we've really been trying to make recently to really increase collaboration among our students in our classrooms. Clarify word meanings during conversation. So I was eavesdropping a little bit here, and she was saying she has some students who are incorrectly using words, right? So if their classmates are not clarifying that, it's okay for us to step in and provide a little clarification. Using children's questions to help them make connections to new vocabulary. So maybe we've talked about a word, but we haven't explicitly defined it, and a child asks a question, we can come back to that word, right? Wondering about the world together. Lots of new vocabulary comes up when you just wonder about the world and you explore new topics and ideas. Extending topics of conversation to enrich children's understanding. And reading about or telling children more about what's happening in the world. So current events is a great way to bring new vocabulary in without explicitly teaching the vocabulary. So another thing that the Essential says is that we need to give children repeated exposure to new vocabulary. And there are lots of reasons for that and lots of ways to do it. So one reason is that we want to build depth of knowledge about those new words. So we want children to say and see the word, and we want to review the meaning with them. We want to give them an example of the word and maybe give them a non-example. We want to share synonyms and antonyms to the words. Maybe provide a visual if it's a noun, right? We can provide a visual, and sometimes even with verbs or other parts of speech we can provide visuals. And maybe act out or assign emotion, to those words so that kids can internalize them. Comparing and contrasting the meaning of new words is another great way. So not only comparing new words to new words, but comparing new words to known words, right? Helping them gain that depth of understanding. And then also kind of comparing those words that all fit into that group, like we talked about with the word said, and all the different ways that authors, can say said without saying said, right? Rereading text, Katie talked about, that rereading text with an intentional focus on vocabulary. So either doing like we saw in the video, that first read through really focuses on the vocabulary. Now we reread it. It builds depth of understanding for the children, and they get new ideas from the text from the rereading. So it's sort of like thinking about an iceberg. The first read through is the tip of the iceberg, but there's a whole level of understanding we haven't gotten to in that first read through. When we read through it again, we start to go deeper. And then Katie talked earlier about text sets. And so again, the advantage of text sets is giving children that repeated exposure to new words in different contexts. So we also, in addition to comparing the words themselves, we can compare texts or contexts that use the same word. So for example, if we think about she shrieked with excitement, is different from she shrieked with fear, right? So talking about the words in different contexts. Of course, the content area learning keeps coming up because there's so much new vocabulary when we're teaching content, and it does provide an authentic way for students to encounter and learn new vocabulary. Semantic maps, this is an example of a semantic map, so it's a visual way for kids to kind of think about those new words that they're learning. So if the new word is transportation, this map shows you that there are forms of transportation on land, and that lists all of those. There are water transportation and transportation that gets us through the air, right? So helping again to build that depth of understanding about the word transportation. Again, incorporating activities that include music, art, or drama. You can have the kids make human semantic maps, I'm tripping over my tongue this afternoon, by putting words like these on index cards, right? And then the kids can form the map with their bodies. You can play charades. You can play guessing games with synonyms and antonyms. you can keep track of how many times the class uses the word. So, for example, the teacher in that video challenged her students to use the words in their writing, right? And maybe she calls attention to it, keeps a tally on the board every time she sees one of those new words in kids' writing.
So Diane spoke a little bit to that piece about just talking in your classroom. If you have a classroom where there is a lot of discussion, your vocabulary is naturally just going to be higher in your classroom. And so one of the bullet points that we can look at with read alouds focuses on higher order discussion. And then also if you go to another bullet point in the vocabulary part, it talks about encouraging talk during content area learning and then having discussions of the text. And so we're going to look at those, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the higher order discussion piece. First of all, I think the big idea behind all of this is this takes a lot of planning for higher order discussions. Naturally, I'd love to say naturally we have all these great ideas for what kids are going to say and then how to take them to the next level. We can have prompts in mind, but that's really hard to do when we don't know the text very well. So being pre-planned for this is really important. So we want to try to get them to take an idea and take that deeper thinking. So whenever we read a text, we kind of want to pick out which areas do we think we can dive into more, and that's going to be our focus point for higher order thinking. We're not going to plan our whole book is going to be full of all these deep discussions and deep questions. Find the piece in there that says, yep, this topic or this word really will make a higher discussion, so that's where I'm going to choose to have that piece. Also, have in mind those open-ended questions. If you are stuck, just go to an open-ended question and see where the kids take it, and then go from there with your next scaffold. And this is one of the biggest areas, is try to look for when we can have student-to-student conversations. Kids are very comfortable asking our questions, and so we can scaffold off of one idea, but really when we can get the kids to listen and scaffold, then they're really getting into that deeper thinking. And we also want to ensure that it's taking place before, during, and after. Just recently, I was in a district and they asked me to come around and go through all of their classrooms and with a checklist look at read alouds. And so I got to gather data on all of them. And I would say a couple of the things that stuck out to the most is that teachers said to me, when you were listening to my kids turn and talk, I feel like there's not much discussion. And really what that's coming from is that the text that you chose to read is not difficult enough. It's not complex enough, so they didn't have anything really to say. It was using a lot of the language they were already using and concepts they were pretty comfortable with. So what one child would answer, another one was simply kind of repeating the same thing back. There wasn't much more, or you couldn't go any deeper in the conversation. So really picking that text during read aloud that's above where the kids are at is an important piece to engage that conversation. Another thing that we found is we all have natural patterns, whether we know it or not. Naturally, we tend to ask questions either at the beginning. We're either somebody who likes prediction. There's a lot of us who love prediction and ask a million questions before we start, and then we kind of forget to question in between. And there are some of us that like to just go through the reading and then at the end ask a bunch of questions. And so kind of monitor where you feel like most of your questions are happening and try to space those out a little bit more throughout your whole read aloud. We gave you an example of vocabulary with read aloud, but we also wanted to give you a different example of vocabulary. This is a shorter video, but this is just a different way of it happening within a content area. And so we're going to have you take a look at this piece, and then after this video, we are going to talk a little bit of, let me skip over here. We're going to talk about how did the teacher engage students using the vocabulary, what structures did she have in place for these conversations to happen, and why do we feel like these are important. So if you can hold on to those questions in your mind when we watch the video, we will come back and have a discussion about them.
In this classroom, children have been learning about light and shadow through books and explorations for several weeks. In today's follow-up discussion, the goals are to encourage talk among children and for children to review and use new vocabulary in a meaningful context.
You will see the students using words like shadow and opaque and light source and path of light. I'll often have the students repeat the word to me, and then we talk about the meaning of it so that they understand those words and can use them through a discussion practice.
Today what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion about our observations. Can you say the word observation with me? Observation. And if you look up here, we have the word, these are our science words. Here's the word observation. Things that we notice through doing a science investigation, things that we notice are our observations.
So the word wall in our classroom, we have a basic word wall and we also have a science word wall. So those scientific words are on there so they can use that as a resource. And also during lessons, I'll often point to the word wall and so then it becomes more natural for them. And so that resource is always there. And it's something that they can access and use throughout their learning. And hopefully those words then become natural in their vocabulary.
So scientists, turn and talk with your team about your observations and the data that you collected from your investigation. Ready, go.
You know, big thing, something is something that if my hand was glass, could the light go through or around? It could shine right out there. So, then not real big, it can't shine through.
They're learning these new vocabulary words through practice, and then the goal is for them to be able to discuss them in small groups and with each other through a whole group discussion. Since they're really truly understanding the meaning of them, the more practice that they're seeing it, hearing it, and understanding those words, they can foster discussions with each other. They're able to add to conversations, and then they're forming real conclusions using their data and their practice that they've had.
The light source, the flashlight, it has to be straight, not wobbly, no corrected. It has to be straight to make the shadow.
Okay, can you explain that to me? So you have two things going on. Could you use this piece of string to show me what you mean with the light source coming off and the path of light that's coming from the light source? Could you use that? What if I pulled the light source? Could you show me how the path of light would go? So in a straight line. And then what did it do when you hit the object?
It made a shadow.
It made a shadow. I noticed that when you were doing your investigation, some of you had a light source really close to the object, and others pulled the light source away from the object. Did you notice anything happening? Axel, what did your group notice?
That it was making big shadows and little shadows. When you moved it far, it was a little shadow, and when you closed it, it was big shadow.
Oh. So, if we were to do an investigation with shadows, and we went outside and it was a sunny day, what do you predict we might see? Madison?
Our shadow.
Why?
Because it's a light source, and light source, when it's like a light source and you're an opaque object, it can always make you a shadow.
So you're going to see your own shadow? What would be the light source, though, if we were outside?
Sunshine.
Natural or man-made?
Natural.
I think it's refreshing that we can incorporate vocabulary practice embedded within their learning. So it's not something separate from, because I also think that's not as meaningful to them and they're not going to learn from that. They're just going to forget it at the end of the day. The goal through this type of practice is that the students are using the vocabulary in meaningful ways. So I believe that incorporating everything within, especially within our science curriculum, is an amazing thing for our kids.
Got it. I gotta click off of it so I can move
In
forward
this classroom,
here.
children have been learning.
Thank you. Oh, nope, it's still doing video. I'm gonna go past this one. I'm gonna skip to the questions. Okay, so just at your table, we're coming back to these questions again. And I want you to talk a little bit about in what ways did the teacher engage the students into the vocabulary? And then also, what structures did she have to have in place in order to be able to have that discussion? So you guys can go ahead and start talking at your table.
Okay, thank you. So this is bullet number 5 under Essential 2. And it says that read-alouds involve instructional strategies depending on the grade level and children's needs. And I'm not going to read through each one of those, but we'll go through some examples of them. So the first one is print referencing. So when we're reading aloud, we are not just reading and showing the picture, but we're actually finding opportunities to reference the print itself. So a great way to do that is if you have a document camera, to put the text up on the document camera while you read and let the children follow along. If it's an early elementary classroom, you might point to the words as you read them. In upper elementary, I've seen 5th grade teachers put the text up and just let the kids follow along while they read. So again, depending on the age of the children and their needs in terms of referencing print, you might do any one of these different, might reference any one of these different things. So this is an example of a read aloud where they're referencing print. So the book is up on the document camera and the kids can see the text while the teacher is reading. And then different instructional strategies. And so this is from the Essentials again, modeling application of knowledge and strategies for word recognition. So strategies to model, thinking about how thinking about the sounds in the word, looking for word parts that you know, trying different pronunciations for some of the same letters, especially for vowels, or trying different vowels, breaking the word into smaller parts, and thinking about whether the word makes sense, and if not, try again. So obviously as teachers, when we're reading aloud, most of the time we know the words, right? Occasionally we might come across a foreign word or a name or something that we're not quite sure how to pronounce. But even with words that we do know, we can identify words that we know our kids will struggle with when they come across them, and we can model these strategies for decoding those words as part of our read aloud. And then we also want to focus on reading comprehension strategies. So reading comprehension strategies are the things that we do mentally as proficient readers that help us understand what we're reading. So it says deliberate efforts by a reader to better understand or remember what is being read. A lot of it, as proficient readers, happens unconsciously, right? And we know that the reading comprehension strategies include things like monitoring for understanding. We do that automatically. When we're reading a more difficult text, we make a deliberate effort to slow down the pace of our reading to help us better understand. When we're reading an easy text, we read faster. But we also do things unintentionally when we're reading difficult text that we have strategies to help us. We ask questions about the word, like what might this mean? And we look at the context around the word. And we're not reminding ourselves to do those things. They happen automatically. But they don't happen automatically for our kids. So we have to teach them how to use those things, how to use those strategies. And when we're teaching the strategies, modeling how we do it in a read aloud is a really good way to show kids that we continue to practice them beyond the lesson when we're teaching it. And then we also want to teach why and when to use those strategies. And we want to help students understand how to actively think about being strategic when they're reading. What strategies can I use to not only help me decode the words, but to help me understand the text as a whole?
Thank you. So now we're going to close up our thinking on what is a purposeful read aloud then. To close up, we want to make sure, first of all, it is purposeful, that there's a reason why that we're doing it, that we have taken the time to plan it, and we want to make sure that we're teaching explicit instruction within that read aloud time, that we want to make sure that we have a goal in mind when we're coming to, do we want comprehension today? Do we want vocabulary to be a focus today? We also need to remember it's okay to be repeating stories. We want to repeat stories and give different purposes when we repeat reading the stories. Also, we can play around with the length of time. Some of those little kindergartners just can't sit for as long as to where some of our older students can, so we can dig a little bit deeper. So we need to keep that length in mind as we go as well. And then also that this should be something that we do every day. This shouldn't be something that we should wait for, oh, I have snack time, I can do it now, or I can quick do it before gym class. This should be something that we have scheduled into our day. And it's okay to not only do it during that scheduled time, but to pick it up again and use part of it as a mentor text. If you are doing instruction in writing or reading, you can also use part of your read aloud to continue and have conversations and move into your mini lesson. Also, it's great to pick it up throughout different content areas. And so then that way that helps us to remember too to choose different genres that we can bring into the mix as well. And again, the most important piece is that we do this every day. Now, we would have loved to have more time and be able to go even further into reading, into the shared reading and close reading pieces, but obviously we don't have time to do that. We do have a couple articles that we found that we like up here, and so we just want to offer that to you before we leave, that if you want to do a little bit more reading into what shared reading is and what close reading is, then that can give you some more information on that. And we also want to give you time to do a little bit of reflecting today. Since it is our last session and balanced literacy is a big topic, and we could even go beyond what we've gone into the basics that we can do within the time frame that we have. I want you to think about a couple things. So first of all, what is your definition and understanding of balanced literacy? How might that have changed a little bit? And then I also want you to start thinking a little bit about what are parts you would like to dive deeper into. You kind of got a glimpse of a big picture of overall areas. What are some that really caught your attention that you say, I might want to dig deeper into this? When we have our survey at our last session, we're going to be asking for topic ideas. We want to take your input and decide what topics we want to bring to the table next year. And if there are areas you want to dig deeper into, then we want to make sure we hear your voice and we dive into those pieces as well. So if you could just take a couple minutes and answer a question, reflect a little bit on balanced literacy, but also kind of jot down to yourself, what are some things you might want to dig deeper into? And when you're done reflecting, we'll meet you back into the main room. Thank you.